Now, JP Chase, the biggest bank in the world with a market capitalization of nearly $600 billion, operating all over the world, including 22,000 employees here in the UK. Yesterday, they announced £40 million in new philanthropic investments to help connect young people and underserved communities to economic opportunities. Their chairman and chief executive, Jamie Dimon, joins us now. A very good morning to you, Jamie. Thanks for joining us.
Thrilled to be here.
So tell me about this £40 million philanthropic investment. Why do you do those sorts of things?
Yeah. So, your public may not know, we've been in Britain for 200 years. In fact, J.P. Morgan's father lived here and actually started the bank here. So we're fully invested, 22,000 employees. Wherever we go around the world, we invest in work skills. That's, I'd say, a very traditional thing that we do. The thing that's a little different this time is we have Chase UK. So we now have like 2 million customers. And so we have a consumer brand. We want to get that out. But we always invest in our communities. We think that makes sense to help lift up communities, get involved, hire people, train people. It's good for society. It's good for the company. It's good for your reputation.
And you've done this sort of thing, I know, in the US, in places like Detroit. What's the focus here in the UK?
Yeah, the focus here is twofold. It's work skills. So it's one of the things we can do best at all is making sure kids get the education they need. So when they leave high school, community college or college, they have a certificate that get them a well-paying job, that start them on a path to a great career. It's doable. We look around the world, people have wonderful programs. So we don't have to invent them, we can just replicate them essentially. The second one is financial education. I think every school should be teaching that, like in K-12 and 6th grade, just basic things about how do you save money, how do you avoid, being taken advantage of, how do you start a mortgage, start a business, get a mortgage, own a home or something like that. So, and that's will be disseminated mostly through schools.
It, I guess, shows, you mentioned the history of the investment bank here, long-standing, Chase UK with 2 million customers. It shows a commitment here to the UK. There's been quite a lot of doom and gloom, whether that's since Brexit or since the pandemic, about the economy here. What's your snapshot of it?
Yeah. Well, listen, the world's been through a very difficult, weird time. We had COVID, obviously it was terrible, and then we had the recovery from COVID, and then you have the war in Ukraine, which is obviously a humanitarian crisis, and we need to make sure we gear up for that. I hope you're going to raise that a little bit later. But I look at the UK. The UK is a great country. It's been a great country and partner and friend of America. You look at all the wars against very terrible people. America, UK, Australia, France stood together. I'm always reminded about the history of the UK. It stood alone for 9 months. 20,000, I think, Britons were killed, during 1940 in the Battle of Britain. It is an unbelievable country. Yeah, like other countries, it's gone through some things. It's trying to figure out what's going to work. I think the most important thing to me when you travel the world is the countries need policies that work. And, very often they have policies that don't work, that are done in the name of good. So I'm quite optimistic about the UK. I was walking around London this morning. What a city. It's the melting pot of the world. It's one of the best cities in the world. It's an extraordinary place. People we have here love living here. Mm-hmm. We just opened a new tech center in Glasgow, which is going to house, I think, like 3,500 people. So just keep doing those things, education, work skills, technology. The UK will be fine. And
specifically in terms of economic policy, I know you've met Rishi Sunak a few times. Yep. I think you saw him again yesterday. You met Keir Starmer for the first time yesterday?
I did.
Do you see them both as pro-business? Is there a gap between them?
Yeah, no, look, I have enormous respect for Richie, and I met Keir for the first time, and the same thing. One of the things I like, they're pro-business. And, the public of these countries, growing the economy is a good thing, and that should benefit everybody. And, in America, I talk about the framing of the American dream. It is true. In a lot of these countries, the lower income folks haven't done as well as they should. We should do things about that. But if you don't grow the economy, you damage that. So everyone I heard in both the conservative and labor government are talking about growing the economy, technology, research and development, simplifying regulations, making it easier for people to start businesses and grow businesses, making sure the schools educate what the businesses need to have good paying jobs. And so those policies work. And if you go around the world, I can mention country after country where that actually worked.
And ultimately, you think the economy's in safe hands, whichever way our election goes?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And we would help whoever wins, yeah.
It's interesting because in the developed world, as you well know, the US economy has been the envy of the G7, particularly since the pandemic and the growth, the relative outperformance of growth that the US economy has had. Why have they been able to achieve that? Why have you been able to achieve that?
Yeah. Well, one thing, one advantage America has is that it's a huge country with 330 million people. That's a huge home market. And it actually does make it easy for companies to build economies of scale, things like that. You're trying to do that here with the European Union. And I think it is important that, to finish that. The European Union is one of the great accomplishments of mankind, in my opinion. But if you don't have a big market, it makes it harder for companies to compete. America's always been one of the most innovative nations in the world. It's a huge financial capital. It's got huge venture capital, private equity, and a lot of that's coming here too. So when I travel, to the UK and Europe now, you have huge innovation taking place here. There just happens to be more there, and so hopefully policies here will start growing here a little bit faster.
Just before we dive deeper on the US, did you suggest there that the European Union was one of the great developments? So was it a mistake of the UK to leave?
Look, the British people voted on that. So, that's over. That doesn't mean they can't have a great relationship with the EU. And I think that that's what they're trying to do. So think of military, strategic. They're still partners. They're just not partners in the way they were before. But I think having big markets is a huge competitive advantage. And so for the EU to do that, and of course, Britain will be part of that too. So in one way or another.
In terms of the US outperformance in the short term, there's those aspects you mentioned, the scale of the market. Is some of the economic growth the US is seeing at the moment just because of borrowing and great?
Yeah, that's a very good point. America spent a lot of money, and during COVID and after COVID, and our deficit's 6% now. That's a lot, but obviously that drives growth. So any country can borrow money and drive some growth, but it may not always lead to good growth. So I think America should be quite aware that we got to focus on our fiscal deficit issues a little bit more, and that is important for the world. So yeah, that did drive some of the growth.
Is that a big warning? Do you think there's a comeuppance to come in the next couple of years? Which
I don't think it's a big comeuppance. I don't think it's the next couple of years. But I think it's why we have higher inflation and sticky inflation. And I think if you want to do a great job in your country and you have a 6% deficit and 100% debt to GDP, this can go on for a while. But the sooner we focus on it, the better. So I'm hoping that the government really focuses on how can we reduce that deficit and still have good growth, but how can we reduce that deficit? At one point, it'll cause a problem, and why should you wait? Because the problem will be caused by the market, and then you'll be forced to deal with it, and probably in a far more uncomfortable way than if you dealt with it to start.
I wanted to ask about, I guess, not just the overall amount of government spending in the United States over the last couple of years, but some of the specifics of it, like the Inflation Reduction Act. And some other acts of the Biden administration. There was quite a lot of reaction here and in the EU when that bill was passed. Yeah. Was it protectionism on the part of the United States for a country that, maybe wants to put up barriers, and we'll come to that, with a rival like China, but was it unfair on allies like the EU and the UK?
Yeah, so first, I think all countries have national security, and they have to look at where they have resiliency. No country is going to, base all their national security on one vendor. So we're all going to do that, and we should do that. I think the allies should talk to each other about it. I think the IRA Act had some good parts and some parts which I wasn't that happy about either. So the good part is, I think it makes sense to focus on doing things that are good for your economy. I'm going to call it industrial policy light that helps drive certain things, maybe combat, unfair trade or something like that. I think there are two things I would have done different. It should have been done with our allies. I think it's very important that we keep the allies together economically as we navigate Russia, Iran, North Korea, and our relations with China. And that economic, I call it the economic battlefield, that's one, is trade. We don't want our allies saying, America's going its own way, America first, America only. And there was a bit of that. And I think that could maybe be modified over time. And the second is, I think you have the same issue here, passing these laws is one thing, but if you can't get permitting done, if you can't get building done, if you can't get grids built, the law won't get accomplished. So I think these laws need to be married with things like permitting. And I was here yesterday talking to people, and they say it's the same thing here as in America. It takes too long. 13 years to build, a wind farm somewhere. And so, if that's what we're going to do, this money will fail, but we will fail.
So let's touch on China. You brought it up there. Interestingly, President Biden has quadrupled tariffs on American EVs, announcement coming yesterday. And in fact, in that, he said China's cheating by subsidizing its companies, which is interesting in light of what we just said. There was a period over the last 6 months to 12 months where it felt like the tension between the US and China was actually dissipating a little bit. Are we about to see it ramp up once again?
Well, this will ramp it up a little bit. America has the right to do things to protect itself if it thinks there's unfair trade. And so there has been some unfair trade, but they sell very few EVs in the United States. So we should be very fact-based. But I look at it a little bit differently. I mean, as long as China is kind of on the side of Russia, we're going to have a hard time. And Taiwan will always create problems if that doesn't resolve properly in the future. But other than that, the Western world has a good hand. I mean, high GDPs, good growth, good innovation. We have a lot of allies. We have NATO. We should remember all of that. And we have competition with China. I think the American government is doing the right thing to fully engage. That doesn't mean the Chinese are going to like everything we do, just like we don't like everything they do. But it doesn't have to be war. It could be tough competition, and we should be prepared for that. Again, I think the most important thing here is that we do it together. I wish America stayed in TPP. Trade is a good thing. There are some downsides to trade, but we focus too much on that. And so, to me, we should count our blessings, be strategic, be very thoughtful, fully engage with China. They're not an enemy, but they're competing. They want a different world than we want. And I think they want a different world than we want in the Western world, the free and democratic Western world. So it's worth fighting for.
It's interesting that the UK, Rishi Sunak, bracketed China like you did with some of those other countries in a speech he gave on Monday, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. President Macron last week just welcomed Xi Jinping. You're off to France, I think, to see him later today. Is the EU a little bit too warm to China? When you see President Macron, do you warn him to wake up a little bit to those risks or not?
But I think the President Macron and people here, I think they fully understand it. I don't think they're warming up to China. I think China has become a competitor. We all made a little bit of a mistake in how we kind of expected them after WTO to become more Western and things like that. It's okay. Don't cry over spilled milk. Let's face the future going forward. I think what I hear when I was in France from the President is full engagement. He didn't come here and say, oh, well, that's all great. He, talked to the President Xi about a bunch of things where, France is not happy. But I think they're for engagement, thoughtful engagement, a very strong Europe, and an understanding that China isn't in the same place when it comes to freedom and democracy.
In a CNBC interview you did in January, you made some headlines about what you said about former President Trump. You said, take a step back, be honest. Yep. He was kind of right about NATO, kind of right on immigration. He grew the economy quite well. He was right about some of the stuff he said about China. I know you turned down the offer of Treasury Secretary first time around from him in 2017. Did those comments hint that you're warming up to say yes if he asks you again?
Absolutely not. I made those comments to make a point that we should listen to each other and talk to each other, whether you agree with someone or not, that not all the people who voted for Trump are, voted for him because of his family values. They voted for him because they like some of his policies. And I think people should be very clear about, what policies work and what policies don't work. So whoever wins the presidency, I hope they have policies that work for both America and the free and democratic world. And so I was just trying to make that point. Just like, if you're a Republican, I think you should listen to some of the Democratic points about why, maybe the economy's not working for everybody. But again, either side could make these statements. It doesn't mean you have policy that works. So I focus more on the policy side than anything else.
In terms of the outlook for the US election, is there an argument that the economy in the US will be okay either way? Is that all that matters, or are you also fearful about what might unravel the division that's going to exist in the months ahead?
Yeah, look, I don't like the division. I think what works in life is collaboration, people helping each other, and people treating each other respectfully. I don't like the polarization. I don't like the finger pointing, the name calling. I don't like any of that stuff, whether it comes from either side. And so, and if you look at America, if you look at most elections, it didn't change the course of the economy in the short run. My main concern isn't economic and, we're going to have a soft landing or not. We'll deal with that. I consider it the weather. My main concern is keeping the world free and safe for democracy, dealing properly with terrorism in the Middle East, properly with what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. This is a big deal, and obviously it's affecting Iran, our relations with China. I think that's what I'd really be focusing on. And that could affect, the world for the next 100 years. That's the most important thing, not whether the economy has a soft landing or not.
I guess just finally, and this applies here, I think it's fair to say it applies in particular in the United States. You've touched on this in some of your answers about the extent to which everyone gets to feel they're a part of growth when it comes. Yeah. When you do snapshot the state of play in the US, 5 or 6 companies worth $2 trillion, a huge number of billionaires, some of which have hundreds of billions just themselves. Is the inequality and the headlines that creates in the United States that exists, is that sustainable for capitalism to survive?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good thing, but I don't think it's because Apple did well or Microsoft. But I wrote in a chairman's letter, and you can get it, that the bottom 20% of America have been left behind. Their incomes didn't go up for 20 years. They live in more crime-ridden neighborhoods. Their schools aren't helping these kids get jobs. They're dying younger. Their health isn't as good. And we should look at that and do something about it. So, yeah, I think that helps drive some of the polarization. And when you go around the world, that's true not just in America, it's true around the world. And that was true with Democrats and Republicans. I think what we need to do is say, why? Why did all the policies we do didn't lift up those people? It isn't because Apple was successful. So I think people have to be a little careful about, cause and effect here. But we should acknowledge that. And I think it's good for people who want to lift up all their citizens. Just like if you're in a family, you want to, if you had a brother who wasn't as smart as you or as good looking as you or something like that, you would help him. You wouldn't say it's too bad. You're going to have a tough life. And so, I think, yes, we should be focusing on that. It is a problem. It has caused some of the polarization. I think a lot of the prescriptions to fix it have been completely misguided.
My brother, alas, is much cooler than I am, so there's not that issue. I'm usually leaning on him for advice and help. Jamie, it's been great to catch up. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Great to see you.
Jamie Dimon, the Chairman and CEO of JP Morgan.